Are you familiar with this?
I am familiar with it. Here's the thing. I am all too familiar with it at this point. To the point of going, really?
Hello and welcome to episode 185 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. It's Saturday the 30th September. Does anybody know where this year is going? And I hope you've had a great week, you're well and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm no rockstar, but with this podcast, I share the marketing street knowledge I've picked up on my journey from sysadmin to CMO with the help of some true rock stars, my guests and chums who I hope will inspire the marketing rockstar in you. Come say hello. You can find us at rockstarcmo.com or on the socials. We are Rockstar CMO on X and LinkedIn. This week, I'm delighted to share with you a very special episode for me, as I believe this will be the first podcast to dive into my friend and content marketing guru, Robert Rose's latest book, Content Marketing Strategy, Harness the Power of Your Brand Voice, which is launched this week at Content Marketing World. No gimmicks, no gin, no bar, just me and Robert chatting about his book. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back.
We'll be right back.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
If you're a regular listener, you know Robert is a regular on the show. But in the interview, I let Robert introduce himself for those of you who maybe are new to the show or maybe wonder who this dude is that I drink a gin and tonic with every week. But before we start, I thought I'd share a bit about how I know Robert, which hopefully will give this conversation some context. I've known of Robert Rose for a long time. We played in the same content management sandpit almost 2 decades ago when he was a CMO at cloud-based CMS Crown Peak, before cloud was cool, while I worked at various competitors before I became an analyst and we started finding ourselves at a lot of the same events. I paid attention to his work with the Content Marketing Institute, and when I went back into bat with a senior leadership position with a vendor after my brief spell as an analyst, I brought him in to work with me and my team. And inspired by the work he and Joe Polizzi were doing and his first book, Managing Content Marketing, in 2011, supported by a progressive CMO at the time, Grant Johnson, who I often refer to on the show, I decided to add content marketing to my marketing tool belt, forming a dedicated team. And when I left that vendor, I successfully created a content marketing practice within a North American agency while I was living and working in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, is why I have incredible FOMO this week as Content Marketing World is in DC, moved from its usual Cleveland. Great memories of that city. I'd love to have been at that event. Anyway, inspired by working with Robert, I took my marketing education seriously back then. He recommended 5 great books, which I still have and recommend to anybody, which has spawned a library of marketing books. I don't mean to make this sound about me, just wanted to share a little bit about the impact Robert's work has had and why it's such a thrill to regularly hang out with this dude, even virtually. I should also give a hat tip, especially while we're talking about marketing books, to Douglas Burdett, who does this kind of thing so well with his marketing book podcast. I refer to his show a few times in our conversation, and I'll include a link to his podcast in the show notes. Go check it out and hear how this should be done. Right, as Douglas says, let's get on with the show. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. Good evening, Robert. How are you, my friend?
I am doing very well. Thank you for having me on this very special. It's like a Blossom episode, really. That's going to go over the heads of most of the British out there. But there was a TV show in the 80s here in the U.S. called Blossom,
yes,
which funny enough and ironically enough starred Mia Bialik, who of course was in The Big Bang Theory,
yes,
a series that you might be familiar with,
very,
and she and so just about every third or fourth episode of that show would be some sort of tragic, sort of emotional roller coaster that they would take you on. You know, somebody's getting divorced, somebody died, somebody had a car crash, somebody, you know, it's a comedy, but then but they would preface every one of those episodes with, and now a very special episode of Blossom. And so it became a bit of a meme here in the US. And so this is our very special episode of your podcast.
That's so nice.
But it's not tragic. I don't think it's tragic.
I don't think it's tragic. I don't know. I'll get onto the topic of this week.
It might be tragic for some of the listeners, but we'll see.
Well, I'm super impressed with you there, mate, because as you know, because we normally have our standard way of talking to each other every week, which is the premise of being in a bar, and I have my standard script that I do, and we've been doing it for years, and we had to deviate, and I'm like, what am I going to say? And you totally saved my ass just then. Thank you very much.
It's what I do, buddy. It's what I do. I've been doing that with Joe Pulizzi for the last 12 years, so I've got good practice doing it.
You've been carrying that man on your shoulders for all of that.
That's right. 100%. Thank you for noticing. Yes.
Well, speaking of Joe, you've there was a time when you wrote books with him, but I have been, if you're going to ask me what my week's been like, I've been reading this book. It's called Content Marketing Strategy, Harness the Power of Your Brand's Voice. And it's by this chap called Robert Rose. Are you familiar with this?
I am familiar with it. You know, here's the thing. I am all too familiar with it at this point. To the point of going, really? I mean,
really?
Okay.
Really?
You know, but yes, thank you very much for noticing, and thank you very much for reading it, and thank you very much for talking about it. But yeah, it's been a labor of love for the last 18 months, and so all good.
I loved how I almost got a preview copy because I'm in the UK and your publisher is in the UK.
You did get a preview copy.
I got it like 2 weeks before anybody else. I was amazed. And then it's actually...
That's right.
When we're recording,
it's not even available as we record this. It's not available here in the US yet.
I know, and I've got this lovely copy, and I heard you and Joe talking about it on your show, This Old Marketing, and you were talking about the color of the cover and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, I totally know, I got it.
Yeah.
So delighted with that. So and fortunately for me, because I've had it for a while, I've been able to read almost all of it. I'm up to the last bit, and I'm going to ask you about some of that last bit when I get there. But it's a fantastic read, and I very much enjoy your voice in the book. I like how that comes across, and I know that we're chums, and I talk to you quite often. But that you can hear you in it. Do you know what I mean? It's really good, and you don't spend. I'm reading another book that spent, I don't know, the first 3 chapters telling me how to read the book. So that it's nice that you didn't do that. So yeah, it's a fabulous read. So I want to start with, a little bit of an intro of you, because we're doing a special episode. I don't know if people are listening to this podcast for the first time. So Robert, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, for your listeners who don't know who I am, so I have spent the last 10 years doing 2 things, which is, one, working with my friend Joe Pulizzi on building this little organization called the Content Marketing Institute, where I served as chief strategy officer. Prior to that, I was the CMO of a software company for about 8 years, and had built unintentionally, I intentionally built it, but it was unintentionally turned out to be a content marketing organization and a content marketing strategy. And that's when I met this guy, because I was like, what the hell did we just do?
Yeah.
And I ended up meeting this guy, Joe Pulizzi, who was talking about this new idea, and then stalked him and tracked him down, and he and I became friends. And ultimately I joined his merry band of villains, as it were. And we started Content Marketing Institute and grew that. And in the meantime, which is the second part of my job, which has been to consult and train and work with brands all over the world to talk about content strategy, content marketing, and basically the effective use of content in business to drive an overall marketing strategy. And have really been doing that since the very beginning of my career, which now is coming up on 30 years old as a marketer. And And I started all the way back in the 1990s in television. I actually started in the television business, and so I come to content honestly, but and I come to marketing by hook and by crook. So and now I'm just and now what we're doing is doing a lot of coaching, a lot of consulting, and a lot of work in the content space.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. And I met you through, we met each other through the content marketing and content management business because we were both at different sides of the aisle in that particular thing. We meet at a lot of the same conferences. But also when you switched over to doing content marketing, I brought you in and you did a couple of workshops with my team and various things together back when you published your first book, which I'm going to make a reference to later on, when you published Managing Content Marketing, which I have in my hand. I don't do it on video, but I still refer to it. But now I have a new book to refer to, and we'll get onto that. So
Nice.
Where should we start with this? I think that you have told me, and I believe that you may have even written it in the book, and you certainly said it today on your podcast, is that you had no intention of writing another content marketing book. What inspired you to do this?
Yeah, it's like, does the world need another book on content marketing? And the answer to that is probably no.
Yeah.
So what on earth would motivate me to do such a thing? Well, and the thing is, and I do mention this in the book, is that so much of what has been written about content marketing, both by me, by others, etc., have focused, rightfully so, on this is not a derogatory comment at all. Have focused on the first two words, right? They've either focused on content, basically how to create better content, how to do storytelling, how to create engaging content. Ann Handley teaches everybody how to write better. All those kinds of things. Or they focused in on marketing, right? How to optimize your customer's journey, how to do SEO better, how to do, basically optimize your marketing process using content better. And very few, if any, of the books have really focused on that third word, strategy. And so I leaned in, and it's really what I've noticed in terms of what's been going on in the market over the last 10 years. This is why this is such a labor of love for me, is there are two kinds of companies out there. There are what I call the conscious content marketers, which are really everybody that we think of when we look at sort of the examples that get used in conferences, the Red Bulls and the Cleveland Clinics and the REIs and those kinds of companies who have consciously decided to use content marketing, thought leadership, entertaining content. They've read the books, they've come to the conferences, they've won the awards, and they are making success. But just as equally are what I call the unconscious content marketers. And those are the companies, the Amazons, the JP Morgan Chase, the Legos, the Nikes. They're out there creating and operating as a media company and optimizing their business strategy using content marketing, but they're not reading our books. They're not learning from us. They're not consciously creating what they would call a content. And many of them have been asked, by the way. And so my question that I wanted to come to the book with was pretty simple. It's like, what do those companies have in common, right? The unconscious and the conscious. And the conclusion I came to was, it was, as Michael Porter, the famous Harvard business professor, would define it, a set of activities, right? He defines competitive strategy as a set of activities that fit together that are either different than your competitors or that are performed differently, the same activities performed differently. And ultimately, that's what consists of a strategy. So I wanted to write about content marketing strategy. What are the activities that these conscious and unconscious companies were doing that are actually creating a competitive advantage using content marketing as a source of that advantage? And that's ultimately, I said, that's a book I want to read, and it's an answer I want to get. So that was the impetus for saying, this is a book worth writing.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great that you got inspired for that, and it really is a book about strategy. I mean, I'm going to skipping ahead a little bit here because I was going to refer to this, because you don't talk about storytelling, that easy bit, the bit that you read a lot of books about until chapter 7. It really is about strategy. But I'm curious, before we get really diving into the book, I'm curious about the process, because you're a really busy guy, and I'm very fortunate I get to talk to you on the podcast once a week. So I know a little bit about your schedule, but how do you find the time to write? What is your process? For those of us that we think we've got a book inside us, how do we get it out?
It's obviously there's a time commitment, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that I work whenever I'm going to write a book is I just plan on giving up my weekends for a particular set of time, right? And for me, it was really from September of last year. It's almost coming up on exactly a year now. From September of last year, because that's when I was approached. I was approached at the end of August from the publisher asking if I would write this book. Well, to be clear, they asked if I would write a book, and they said, if you could write a book, what would it be about? And it was very much a synchronicity in my life, because I had been thinking about exactly what I just talked about for the last 2 minutes. And so I said, well, this is the book I'd like to write. And they said, that's fantastic, because that's the book we'd like to publish. And I said, well, that's lovely. And so it then became a question of, okay, when is it going to get released? And normal sort of mainstream publisher moving at the speed of icebergs. They said, well, we usually take, between, 15 and 18 months to get a book from live. And I said, well, that's, that won't do. I said, what if I wanted to publish it at Content Marketing World next year?
Yeah.
In September, at the end of September. And they said, okay, well, to do that, we would have to have the manuscript finished by January. And I said, done. I said, that's a done deal. So ostensibly, I just gave up my weekends from September through January, the early parts of January. And because I can't work on a book while I'm doing other things. Right. In other words, I can't work for 2 hours in the middle of my workday on the book and then come back to regular work and my consulting or doing stuff for CMI and the things that I do as a job. It just doesn't work for me that way. I have to have dedicated hours of, and I'm one of those writers who I do outline a lot. So I outline the entire book and I put it all up on note cards and I organize the chapters the way I want them. And I sort of draw a through line for a larger arc about what I want the book to start, middle, and end, as a story. So I do all that outlining first, and then I put it into a big abstract where I write a 1-page abstract for every chapter. And so once I've written an abstract for every chapter, then it's literally about taking each of those pages, each of those, in this case, 12 pages, and then looking at each page and going, great, now I just got to write 3,000 words on this, and I got to write 4,000 words on that, right? And so it's, that process, I'm definitely not like normal writers and actually go do all the research and then write the book. I'm definitely one of those who writes 4 sentences and then goes down the rat hole of research and goes, ooh, that's fun. Let's explore that, And so each chapter could take me a day or it can take me 2 weeks.
Wow.
So it just really depends. And I'm not organized and scalable. And in fact, I actually talked through this in the book as one of the real challenges is that if I had to teach this, if I had to actually scale this process, it wouldn't work for anybody, but it works for me. And so that's my process basically, is to just give up my Saturdays and Sundays for the book and spend at least 4 or 5 hours every Saturday and Sunday for the, foreseeable, the 12 weeks that I did that. Aside from the Cowboy game, of course, I would break for that.
You must. I was thinking it was during the football season, so you must have. There must be some breaks, but
there was definitely breaks taken. Yeah, there was definitely tequila breaks as well as football breaks taken during that. Yeah,
I appreciate you sharing your process because, I've thought about writing books many times, as you know, and And I like the way that you sort of sketched it out, and then you're writing it chapter by chapter, because I've thought about it sometimes as you can think about it as blog post by blog post almost.
I do write them sometimes out of order. I will tell you that.
Wow,
because I have them outlined so well,
yes.
I sometimes will tackle an easier chapter first, or something that I'm feeling particularly passionate about, or
if
I went down some research rat hole and found a really cool metaphor or something like that, I'm like, I'm going to write that now while I'm inspired. So for example, the storytelling chapter was one of the very first that I wrote, because it's one of my favorites.
What I do is I think about whether I'm going to use Scrivener or some other tool, and then spend 2 hours researching tools for writers.
Right? Yeah. For me, it's plain old Microsoft Word. I've never gotten into the whole mindful writing thing, into the into that, or the 500 words a day app, or whatever it is.
No,
it's just open up a Word doc and go.
Yes, I think that's probably how you're supposed to write. Just actually write. Stop looking at tools. Just get on with the writing. All right, I'm going to get back to the book now. So, So I mentioned earlier on, and by the way, I was going to make a reference at the beginning of this that for anybody who's confused, I am not Douglas Burdett. This isn't the Marketing Book Podcast, and I'm not doing this. And I would encourage you to listen to that. And also, I hope, Robert, that you'll be on that very show.
I will be on Douglas's show. I believe I'm scheduled for either end of October or early November.
Oh, goody!
He did not get a preview copy of the book, or just received his preview copy. And by the way, the reason for all of that is because Kogan Page, the publisher of the book, is a UK-based company, and of course had it much earlier there than they do in the US, because that's English for you. And so he got his preview copy, and he really studies the book before he has anybody on his show. So that's why it's a little later. So I'm at the end of October, early November. I think,
he's great, because he absolutely,
he's lovely. He's a wonderful man.
He definitely reads the books, and he has a passion for the books as well, which I love hearing coming through on his podcast. And just so the listener knows, and I know that you and me are friends, Robert, but I did not get a preview copy. I just pre-ordered on Amazon, and I got it before the preview copy.
Right.
So
exactly.
All right. Anyway, earlier, and so yes, a big hat tip to the giant I happen to be standing on the shoulders of, which is Douglas Burdett and his Marketing Book Podcast. But I did mention earlier on about managing content marketing, which was. This is your first book, right? I think of it as your first book. You wrote it with Robert and Joe Polizzi in 2011, and it's always been not very far from my desk when I want to talk about content marketing. It's really good. What's changed since you wrote that book in the last 10 years?
So much. That's so much that I don't even need to really cover it all. Because everybody's sort of the self-evident, stuff that has changed. But specifically, and I think what you're getting at is what has changed about the practice, in particular. And I think there, the key is one of the first things we had to do as content marketing became a thing, and people started recognizing it as an approach for serving a marketing function, is there's again, this is not meant to say that it was wrong or it was natural. It was the way things were going to evolve, is that businesses looked at it as a specialized activity. Yeah. And what I mean by that is that it was seen as something that was separate and distinct from other marketing efforts. So it was either a service to the business. In other words, you hired your editorialists, as it were, and those could be brand journalists, it could be content marketers, it could be subject matter experts, it could be leveraging your subject matter experts into a project management team that would pull that information from people and do thought leadership or whatever it was. It was seen as a specialized activity that sort of got done off in a corner somewhere, right? And so as it was done off in a corner somewhere, it was usually, for most businesses, it was about publishing a blog, making a podcast, creating a resource center, maybe, being really out there and creating a digital magazine or an email newsletter or something, right? It was about creating something. And in addition to creating something, it was also about feeding the rest of the organization assets, right? So feeding these thought leadership or entertainment or, episodic pieces of content to sales enablement, whatever it is, as bait, right, for the regular marketing. And what happened then was some of it worked, some of it didn't. Some of these unconscious companies started to emerge, and people started going, yes, see, they're doing it too.
Yes.
Therefore, we should do more of this. And it started to grow in popularity. It started to grow in arguably effectiveness. And then it hit a wall, right? And then it hit a wall. And for every business, it just about hit a wall, which was, we can't scale this.
Right.
In other words, that small team in the corner went from 2 to 4 to 6 to 10. And then all of a sudden people went, it's still not keeping up. And we can't make this team 20. We can't make this team 40. And even if it was 40, it wouldn't keep up. And so what started to happen was that everybody else started to create content too. So sales created content. The web team started creating content. Brand team, everybody in the business, right? It was, content for everybody. And the remit of content marketing changed, which was it became a thing that it wasn't about the team being good at content. The strategy became, how do we make the business good at content? And so it was much more of a, do we set guidelines? We build playbooks. We build, standards, and we build and content strategy. Remove the marketing for a moment. Basically, just how do we create a structured process around all this content we're creating? How do we do that? Became the real focus. Now, here we are in 2023, and the real difference is that those two ideas have once again converged, but now it's really about marketing full stop. In other words, the question now for most businesses isn't how do we build a content marketing team? It's how do we build a content marketing function with the team we have? And so how do we create a structured, organized process around classic marketing skills, from product marketing to sales enablement to PR to comms to all those things, and create those as roles, as responsibilities of our classic marketing team, because that's the only way we can scale this thing, and create it in a way so that it's structured and standardized across the entire business, and do so in a way that affects our business strategy. In other words, it's not marketing like a media company. It's becoming a media company. And that is where that's the sort of backbone or sort of, nefarious undertone, if you will, of the book, is that content marketing is modern marketing. Modern marketing is what we think of as content marketing these days, kind of full stop.
Yeah.
And if you just see it that way, then it's almost, it becomes a true business strategy, not just this tactical thing that we do off in the corner.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thread to pull on, actually. There, isn't it? Is where we're moving to a point where, I mean, I've always talked about content publishing being everybody's second business, but we've always talked about content marketing as a discipline within marketing. But you're now saying that it is marketing, but it's also not just marketing. It is, front and center of something that needs to run throughout the organization, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Because the mistake that most companies make, and this is the commonality, right?
Yeah.
Where you look at the conscious and the unconscious content marketers out there.
Yeah.
So if you look at Amazon's a great example of this, right? Where what did they do, right? What did they, because if you look at it at surface level, you go, yeah, that's cool. That's a content market. It's kind of content marketing, right? They created, they spend here, and here's the math, right? They spend $15 billion or more on content every year. Filmed, they're winning Emmy Awards now and Oscars and all sorts of things, right? Amazon is now truly a media company.
Yeah.
And so it's through Prime Media. The revenue that they make from Prime Media is somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't think they disclose it specifically, but if you just do the math and the number of subscribers multiplied by the subscription price, it's probably a couple of $2 billion. That math just doesn't work as a standalone business, right? You can't make it work. Yeah. So you have to ask yourself, you say, well, why do they do it, right? They're not a stupid company. Well, the reason they do it is pretty simple, because what they've noticed is that Prime Video subscribers spend 2 to 3 times the normal spend on products and services at Amazon, as does a normal customer.
Wow.
So it's a multiplier for value.
Yeah.
So it is inherently a marketing effort.
Yes.
Now, they probably would just say, look, we needed a way to create a direct relationship with our Prime subscribers that goes beyond simply just subscribing to free shipping.
Mm-hmm.
We need the data about what people care about. We want the information for those people. We want the value that those subscribers bring from being able to reach them frequently. In other words, we want the ability to reach that audience whenever we want to reach them with specials and with things and all those kinds of things, because is what will inspire them to spend more. And so for us, it's a business calculus, right? And we say, great, that's a business calculus. And they just recognized inherently that operating as a media company would help them provide that wealth to the business.
Yeah.
Well, notch that down like 1,700 levels to a normal size company.
Yeah.
And you go, that's the secret.
Yeah.
It's not just marketing like a media company or activating content like a media company would, selling something like a film or a TV show or something like that. They have the same problems that we all do, right? Media companies, from a marketing perspective, they got the same problem in marketing their products we all do. How do you pierce the noise? It's a noisy marketplace, blah, 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 all that stuff. But what they have a difference is how they operate, how they actually treat content in their business as a reusable, repackageable asset that builds audiences, that adds wealth to the business in multiple ways, advertising, subscriptions, insight, data, all the kinds of ways that an audience adds value to a business. And they understand that. Yeah. And that's the real difference that I see in the conscious and unconscious content marketers making, is they treat audiences like an asset. And it adds wealth to the business. But the way to get an audience as an asset is to operate like a media company, which means changing your workflow, changing your technology infrastructure, changing your standards and guidelines, and honestly, changing the remit of marketing full stop.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. And that really comes through in the book, which is why it's so much about strategy, right? Is that's what you're trying to convey, is that we need to change our organizations to fit that model. And as for making that parallel, that Amazon Prime is just a content marketing strategy to sell you more stuff, that's just genius. I love that. So you mentioned earlier about strategy and also what the definition of strategy. So what's your definition of strategy in this context? Because it's a word that's banded around a lot for a lot of things, right?
Well, this is where I borrow heavily and I stand on the shoulders of giants, right? Yeah. Because in the beginning of the book, I actually define so that we have a common definition, because I think that's one of the most important things of setting a strategy, is to have common definitions of things, right? Yeah. It's one of the first things that I'll do with a client is to say, we have to get clear and common about the way that we define things, because without that, we're talking past one another. And so I lean heavily on content as a definition, marketing as a definition, and there I lean very heavily on my marketing hero, Philip Kotler, for that. Yeah. And then for strategy, I actually lean heavily on Michael Porter, who wrote a whole thesis on this, on what is strategy. And that's where I lean in on what he says strategy is, which is, how do you fit together activities that create competitive advantage? And what he's meant by that was, of course, the activities in your business some of them will be the same as in other businesses. We'll both do finance. We'll both do legal. We'll both do marketing. We'll both do activity. And they're just, activities meaning things people do, the way people do things. Yeah. And so the key is to either do different activities than your competitors or do the same activities in a different way. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what competitive strategy is all about. So if you then throw, and I won't go to the time now of defining content or marketing in that perspective, but if you say content marketing strategy, right? And I put the pause in there specifically, content marketing strategy. Yes. You say, okay, what are the activities that fit together that are either different or that are done in a different way that a business can do to create competitive advantage. And so then from that, you can derive a definition, which I put into the book, which is basically a content marketing strategy is the sum of all of the activities, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. And so that's how I define strategy in this format.
Yeah, and what I really got from the book, particularly in the beginning, is where you're talking about that piece, the strategy piece, how we go about changing our organizations and how we go about operationalizing our content marketing is actually a differentiation. It's not the content. And I thought that was really inspiring in the fact you're saying that, well, the content, anybody can create the content. It's how you do it. So tell us about that. That was what sort of epiphany? Where did you get that epiphany from? That was amazing.
Yeah, it basically is ultimately the same as that your product will never differentiate you. It's how you communicate about your product that will differentiate you, right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, that's where people want to focus, right? I mean, we even talked a little bit about this in our pre-show chat, right? Where people want to focus is on the words, the pictures, the sort of experiences, right? And how that differentiates a particular brand. And in fact, it's the topic of most, honestly, it's one of the reasons that I wrote the book is because so many of the other books focus in on that, right? They focus in on what it is you create as being a differentiator. And of course, that's the most, honestly, the most useless advice for most people.
Yeah.
Because I can go up and give an entire presentation on how the value of the content that Cleveland Clinic provides, how they hired this amazing subject matter expert in the topic of diabetes, and they wrote some of the best content on diabetes that exists on the internet, and that's what differentiates them. And it's not what differentiates them.
Yeah.
Because honestly, if I tell you that, you go, okay, that's nice for them. They were able to do that. I can't do that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not going to do that. Or even if I do that, I'm only going to be differentiated for the day until somebody copies me, right?
Yeah.
That's the hope. That's the best you can hope for, is that your content on any given day is so differentiated that everybody copies you. And so ultimately it is a fleeting differentiation, the words, the pictures, the experiences you create, because at very best you go viral, and then ultimately everybody copies you and you become part of the noise again.
Yeah.
So how do you create long-lasting differentiation? And the only way that you can even attempt it is to do things in a different way, to operate in a different way, to communicate in a different way. And so that's ultimately where differentiation lies, is not in what you, and this is especially true in today's world of AI and automation and content that can be copied so readily and easily, is that it's not in what you say, it's in how you say it.
Yeah.
And the origins of by what you say it. So how do you speak consistently? How do you speak how do you consistently speak in a differentiated way? Well, it's about creating the infrastructure and the ability for you to do that and having the right activities to be able to do that. So that's the thing that we can build.
Yeah.
Because you can't build on, I know you feel this way. You go to a conference and you see Nike is amazing. Look at their amazing commercial that they created. Look at this amazing creative. Look at this. That's what you need to do, marketer, right? You need to create the next Colin Kaepernick commercial. You need to create the next kid running down the middle of the street, or you need to create the next iPhone. It's like, okay, thanks. That's not helpful at all,
Yeah. What I like about this idea, sorry to interrupt you, mate, but I like the fact this sort of shifts the creativity back into the back office, right? Is that you need to be creative in your content, but you need to be inspired and creative in your strategy and bold in your strategy, right? Before you even know what the idea is. The fact that you're going to be bold about how you go about doing it. Is that
it? No, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is funny because I talk about a lot. There's a famous video of Steve Jobs, sort of deriding the value of process-focused people.
Yes,
and basically saying that Yeah, you can, and it's all, and he's taking HP to task at the time, Hewlett Packard to task at the time, and the process oriented people.
Yeah,
and he said, if you've got process oriented people, they're all about process, and they can't innovate, they can't differentiate, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what he wants is he wants a bunch of creative chaos, right? He wants creative people in the room who are going to, as he uses the example, he said, they're going to build me a mouse in 5 days. Instead of the process, which normally takes, 5 months, right?
Yeah.
And so, but where I want to take him to task on that is to say that assumes that creating process and standards are not a creative process. And I 100% believe that it is. In other words, you can innovate process. You can innovate, the project management piece of this. You can innovate on standards.
Yeah.
And it is, in fact, only by having a standard that you can actually innovate against it.
Yeah.
In other words, it goes back to Taiki Ono, who of course came out with the most, rational and all sorts of different workflows that came out of that. But he said, with no standard, there can be no improvement, right?
Yeah.
And so, you can't innovate where a standard doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah, no, this is really interesting. And what I've done there is I've taken down a rat hole away from the book a little bit, and this is really good conversation.
No, it's fun.
And and I know you've got a hard stop, so we need to wrap this up in a few minutes. And I wanted to do my best Douglas Burdett and refer to a page number. And I was going to ask you about why you talk about why on page 126, but I can't do that now because we've run out of time. So finally, in my finest Douglas Burdett, what are the top things you'd like people to take from this book?
I'm hopeful that it is confidence building. I open with a quote that my grandfather used to say to me. So the whole book opens with something he used to chide me with, which is, when you create experiences for people, you not only get to experience the thing that you created, but you get to experience the impact that you have on the people that you created for. So his question to me was always, what experience have you created today?
Yeah.
And so what I really hope is that what people can take away is, look, the models, the frameworks, the examples, the approaches that I describe in the, 200 and almost 300 pages of book.
Yes.
Some of them are going to be right for people. Some of them are going to be wrong. All of them, I hope, can be, to quote, maybe paraphrase is the better word, George Box, all of them are wrong. Hopefully some of them are useful. And so it's a pressure test more than anything else to say, here's a different way of looking at this activity that might help me make something my own. And I actually do say this explicitly in the book, which is to say, make these models your own. There's no proprietariness about these things. I don't care if you use the same language. I don't care if it's, I've seen so many people make modifications to these things that have been better than I could have ever imagined. And so that's what I really hope is people take out of it, is that it's a seed of something that they can grow on their own.
I love that. That's so generous. I love that. And again, mimicking my Douglas Burdett, what are you reading at the moment, or what are you looking forward to reading? What authors are you watching at the moment?
I'm in the middle right now of a book called Principles by Ray Dalio.
Yeah.
Ray Dalio, of course, the famous investor philosopher, I guess you'd call him, more than anything else. And it's a book about investing, kind of. It's more a book about managing your life and managing, your business, called Principles. And it's a newish book that I'm in the middle of right now and enjoying very much.
I'll look out for that. You know that I'm thirsty for new books. I'm always up for new books. So that's fantastic. And when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where are they going to find you, Robert?
Well, the thing I'm really pleased as punch about is that we've now launched a website to accompany the book,
nice,
which now also accompanies my new offering of coaching for practitioners. We've been doing consulting for businesses forever and continue to do that, by the way, to do enterprise level consulting. But I'm also offering up executive and practitioner level coaching as well. And you can find that at contentmarketingstrategy.com, which I paid a penny for, by the way, that URL. So there's that. But it also has the throughout the book, as you've no doubt noticed, there are call outs to that website saying, hey, if you want a deeper level dive into this, or if you want a framework on that, there's a template for that. It's got extra assets for the book that accompany the book. But then it's also got access to coaching and an online booking system and all that kind of stuff as well. That's where you can find me, or you can find me on our classic consulting website, which of course is contentadvisory.net.
Yes, fantastic. So that'll be contentmarketingstrategy.com. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. And are we going to get back to business as usual next week? And will you be in the bar?
It sounds like we are. Yeah, indeed. We get back to some drinking here. Yeah, for sure.
I look forward to it. And maybe then I can dip into the book and then ask you some of the questions I meant to ask you today.
There we go.
All right, mate.
I'll try not to talk so long as well.
Oh, man, it's a joy. It's a joy. Thank you very much for sharing your book on the show. And I'll speak to you next week. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you, Robert. I really enjoyed that conversation. But I don't think Douglas and the Marketing Book Podcast have anything to worry about there. So that's a wrap on episode 185 of the Rockstar CMO effing Marketing Podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thank you to Robert for sharing his book and the process, and to you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. You can find all of our links and the links to Robert's work and his book in the show notes on rockstarcmo.com, along with our blog, newsletter, and all of our previous episodes. And please let us know what you think via the socials. Drop us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, we'll be back to our usual schedule with Jeff in the marketing studio and Robert back in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar. And I hope you'll again join us here for that next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.